Podcasting is more than just talking. It's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
Consultant, author, and business owner Dusty Staub joining me on the BS with Bob podcast. I had a chance to talk with him on my radio program a couple of weeks ago and really enjoyed our conversation and thought I should expound a little bit on some of the things that we talked about. Dusty, welcome back to BSing with Bob.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be back with you.
So I know that the last time that we spoke, we talked about millennials and millennials in the workplace, and I thought that your take on that was pretty interesting. But then we started getting into some other things and talking about, your book, 7 Acts of Courage, and I wish I would have had it in hand prior to that conversation. I'm glad that I have it in hand now. But paging through and looking at the book, there's a lot of great things in there, a lot of great opportunities for people to take hold of some leadership and to, have a better, more profitable life.
Yeah, well, that book came right out of my heart. And before I was a consultant, I was in private practice as a licensed marital and family therapist, and did that for about 5 years, doing clinical work. And before that, I ran crisis centers and was a drug and alcohol counselor. So all that book is about, from the clinical experience, from the consultants, where I've seen people create the greatest pain in their life and the greatest regret is where they lack courage in one or more of 7 significant ways. Was
it hard to come up with just 7? Because there's probably more than just 7, right?
Well, yeah. You could, but when I started categorizing them, they all fell under one or more of those buckets. And these were the acts I saw most often. For instance, one of the things I saw happening in organizations was a lack of the courage to confront. I had senior executives who were afraid to confront peers or to speak up to their CEO or superior. I saw people who were afraid to confront, an administrative assistant who just had a very strong personality. And so a lot of people weren't telling the truth to each other, but there was a lot of complaining and talking behind people's backs, which seems to be epidemic and endemic to many, many corporate cultures, which is really a poison to the system rather than something that should be accepted.
Well, then how do you go about tackling that, especially that one? Because I'm guessing that everybody listening right now, Dusty, has had that time where there's been somebody that they were afraid to say something to, or a boss that may be a jerk that you can't really talk to, or if you do talk to them, they're going to give you that, the stink eye, if you will, or the supervisor, or heck, even the underling that has that strong personality that you just can't seem to crack.
Yeah, I talk about this in the book quite a bit. Courage to confront doesn't mean to dump on somebody. When you're angry and you say things, that's not confronting, that's dumping. And so what I say is, before you get angry, be very strategic. Think about what it is you need to say. What do you need to put out there? And so if I'm talking to, when I to my boss years ago when I had a boss, I still have a boss. She's called my wife. But before when I was working, I had a supervisor. He was very thin-skinned. He was in his 70s. He was in PhD, clinical psychologist, very thin-skinned, but very opinionated. He was right. Everybody else was wrong. And so, I discovered that I'd say, hey, boss, I don't know that you really have the wherewithal to hear what I need to say. I'm afraid that you're going to get really defensive and that you won't hear it. And gosh, I'm really puzzled because you're so smart and you're so strong. I just don't understand what causes this defensive behavior on your part. And he looked at me and he said, well, what do you want to tell me? And I said, all right. And so I told him, and I thought about it quite a bit. So I constructed the message very carefully. And he started getting defensive. I said, see, that's exactly what you do every time we talk about this. And that's why people won't come talk to you. And I'm the only one who will. And I guess what you're saying to us, you'd rather be caught by surprise and have people talk behind your back than to your face. Is that what you're telling me? And he went, whoa, wait a minute. And we had a real honest conversation then. I said, look, you're really, really good. The one biggest thing here is that people don't tell you the truth. They talk around you, and they come talk to me. And I'm the only guy who will come in here because I'm foolish enough, and I'm also your top performer. So I figure you're not going to fire me. Yet I do think that this is something that would make you stronger. And so when he heard that, we were able to have a very good conversation. There are ways to approach people who are defensive, and there are ways to mindset them in a positive way. And that's part of the courage thing that really needs to be addressed.
Does a lot of it have to do with the generation that people are in? Because I know that I'll be 50 this year, and talking with somebody that's in a baby boomer, look at them in a different way because of their age or because of their experience, as you did with your older boss, compared to talking with the millennial or somebody else that that may be younger than you or maybe doesn't have as much experience as you do.
If you're looking at the courage to confront, it is the willingness to tell your truth as you see it, knowing you could be wrong. It's when you think you're absolutely right that it gets to be a real problem. So what I tell somebody, whether they're a baby boomer, whether they're a millennial, younger than millennial, and whichever way it's going, up or down, is you need the mindset. What we've discovered is that we have 5 times the circuits in our brain to notice what's wrong and what's right. So one of the things interesting, Bob, is that we are wired to go negative when people tell us stuff we don't want to hear or when we're asked to make changes. And so you have to govern the mindset. So when the courage to confront is, how do I create a mindset that gives the chance for this person to go down a positive pathway than down the same rat hole people typically go down when they get defensive. And so if I'm doing the courage to confront, I'd say, Bob, I want to talk to you about something. And the reason I want to talk to you is I know you want to be the very best leader you can be here. And therefore, there's something I'm seeing that I'm a little puzzled by, and I want to seek to understand. Now, I've got you in a positive mindset, and I'm going to talk to you about a behavior I'm seeing that's a problem, and I'm seeking to understand rather than telling you that you stink. You're more likely to go along with me and talk about it and for us to have a positive outcome because you want to be the best you can be. I've given you that pathway to go down than you are to get defensive. And so controlling the mindset, speaking in a positive way, is really a critical skill. And we call it setting the intent stage so that the person is willing to go down a positive pathway rather than a negative pathway. That's part of the artfulness of the courage to confront.
Well, Dusty, don't you think that most people would rather go down a positive than a negative in any type of situation?
People would rather go down the positive. That's true. However, we've all been criticized. We've all been belittled. Everybody has had somebody make fun of them. Everybody has felt ashamed or embarrassed. And so we're on the defensive for it. And our brain is constantly scanning for danger, for threat. We're wired that way. And so if you don't manage that initial mindset and you come in and you're saying something that sounds like it could be critical or an attack, or you're saying something that they hear that makes them feel like they're being embarrassed or ashamed or wrong, they're more likely to go negative than positive. So yes, we'd rather go positive, but we're wired to notice what's wrong, and so we have to manage that when we, as we teach people how to have these courageous conversations.
Actually, I could see this working in more than just a work setting. I could see it working in a family setting. I could see it working in a friendship setting, in a lot of different types of settings.
You're right on. The tools that we teach in our organization, which is Staub Leadership International, the work that we do teaches people what we call leadership-like skills, so that people know how to lead their lives at home, at work, with friends, in the community, in ways that are very powerful. And the tools we teach are applicable both at home and at work. And it's bringing emotional intelligence to your intellectual quotient and putting those two together in a really potent package. And you can't do it, though, if you're missing one of the acts of courage, because that's going to be the Achilles heel that'll cause you to limp through life.
Do you have a favorite of the 7?
Oh, gosh. Of those 7, I'd say my favorite is courage to be vulnerable.
It's so funny. I don't mean to cut in and interrupt you there, but that was my favorite, too, just because I think that most people don't want to be vulnerable when it comes to anything. But if you are, you open yourself up to all kinds of new experiences and new opportunities.
I was writing the first edition of the 7 Acts of Courage came out in hardback in 1998. And so in 1998, I was outlining these 7 acts of courage, including the courage to be vulnerable. And at that point in time, my editor, the publisher, which was Executive Excellence, wanted to take that out because no executive wants to talk about being vulnerable. Nobody wants to talk about being vulnerable. I said, look, that's really one of the most critical acts. We have to put it in there. So I was able to leave it in there. And then about 3 years ago, Brene Brown did a TED Talk that's gone viral. Millions have heard it on the importance of being vulnerable. That if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you can't have true innovation in a corporation. You can't have real joy in life. And your level of deep satisfaction in life is directly proportional to your ability to access and have the courage to be vulnerable. And what I love is that she has now affirmed from all her research what I've been saying since 1998, that without that, you will not have innovation. You will not have passion in the organization. You will not liberate it. And I think what I've done is I've been talking about how to do that, how to be more vulnerable, how to be more open, and helping thousands of executives and families figure this out.
Well, Dusty, what are some of the things that we can work on in order to become more vulnerable or in order to open ourselves up to that vulnerability that we all kind of hate but need?
Bob, that's a great question. So I did a TEDx talk about 2 years ago on what I call developing the cardiovascular system of the soul, in which I talked about my journey and where the 7 acts of courage were born. And that was born, the short version of this is, I was 28 years old working in the VA hospital as an intern, doing psychological consults. And I was working with a lovely man who was in his early 60s, who was dying of esophageal cancer. I got to work with him and his family for a few months, and I was with him and his family when he took his last breath. And in that moment, it was like a bolt of lightning went through me, a realization that someday I was going to die. That someday that would be my father on that bed. Someday that might be me on that bed. And that I'd been living my life as if I was going to live forever. I was living my life in a defensive shell, not willing to be vulnerable. I wanted to be Superman, which means to be inhuman. And I realized that I had to change things. And so I had to work on opening up. But the first thing that helps you with the courage to be vulnerable is realizing you're going to die.
Explain that minute. Explain that moment when it hits you.
Bob, I just realized that everything I was going to ever love, everything I was ever going to have, everything I ever could want at some point in time was going to be taken away from me. That everyone and everything I loved at some point would die. And it was the realization that I was busy defending myself, protecting myself from being rejected, protecting myself from from losing. And I was busy running my life not to lose, not to get hurt. And then I realized that a lot of people around me were doing the same thing. And I decided I wanted to go for the gold. I wanted to live my life. The poet Elizabeth Sewell, in a book called The Human Metaphor, I got to hear her speak many, many years ago when I was in graduate school. And she came and she said, look, many people lay down in their graves, pull the marble up to their chin, looking around, hoping not to get hurt while waiting for life to be over. And I realized in some ways I'd been living that way. That when you are afraid to be open, when you're afraid of the feedback, when you're afraid to really be receptive, what you're cheating yourself of is the moment in time you've got, the only moment you've got, which is now. So it's that realization that if I don't live it, I don't claim it, I don't take that risk, I don't open myself to it, I lose it. And so it was, for me, when I started doing that, I started reaching out and being more open to people in my life. It helped me with my family. I transformed my relationship with my father. I also became much more innovative, much more creative. I never would have written any of the books I've written. Would never have, and the 7 acts were born from that, and those acts really helped me. But the core of it, the foundation of it was learning to be vulnerable.
Well, how did the creativity come from the learning to be vulnerable piece?
Well, it's like this. In organizations, you have a brainstorming session, and somebody offers an idea. So I offer an idea to you, Bob, and you go, oh, we've tried that before. Someone else offers an idea, and says, yeah, we can't do that. And so if you're willing to be vulnerable and open to looking at things maybe in a new way, maybe exploring possibilities, even though an idea sounds similar, and you're willing to play with those ideas, and that requires openness, vulnerability, receptivity, then innovation can be born. And if you shut it down, if you're not willing to be receptive, And part of the courage to be vulnerable is raise your hand and say, I don't know. A lot of executives lack the courage to say they don't know or to ask for help. And the ability to ask for help is really essential. And out of that, for me, is a formulation I put together, which it's real simple. It just says this: no one can do it for you. No one can do it for you. You got to step forward. That's where courage comes in. And you can't do it alone. And that's where courage comes in too. You got to step forward, be willing to confront, to dream, to see the current reality, to take action, to be willing to learn and grow. And yet you have to have the courage to be vulnerable, to let other people help you, because you can't do it by yourself, and yet no one can do it for you.
I think I want to add a little bit to that too, and just say that, take responsibility and personal responsibility for things, because I've worked with people, I'm guessing you have, or know people that have dropped the ball on something and then thrown Dusty under the bus or thrown Bob under the bus instead of saying, you know what, man, I screwed up. I forgot to do that. I did this wrong. I know I should have crossed that T and dotted that I, but instead I spelled it completely wrong. And the opportunities that they could have learned from that, they've wasted because they didn't take the responsibility of it.
Exactly. That's a very astute answer. And one of the things that we say is that when you as an executive, or you in your marriage, your family, you take responsibility for your errors, even if you take responsibility for mistake somebody else made, but it was in your area of responsibility, somebody who reported to you, you actually grow in stature and strength, and there's more respect for you than if you're busy pointing the finger and blaming other people. And an exercise I do is, I'd say to you and anybody listening, just point your finger at something. Point your finger at something right now, or at somebody. And as you point your finger, I want you to look down and notice how many fingers are pointing back at you. And what you'll discover, there's usually 3 fingers pointing back at you. So every time you point a finger, every time you blame somebody, every time you throw somebody under the bus, it's a triple curse coming back on you. So we say, stop blaming, stop shaming, take 100% responsibility for your life, and your marriage, your relationships, your work will be transformed. And to do that takes real guts, real heart, real courage.
Either that or learn to point with 4 fingers.
Yes.
Dusty, how has your job as a therapist helped you to become a good business strategist?
It comes down to this. The hardest part of being a good leader isn't the strategy, it's people. You can come up with great strategies, but if your organization isn't equipped to execute, if your work culture, the people, the human systems, how people relate and work with each other, the level of trust, openness, willingness to be vulnerable, courage to confront, be confronted, etc. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to implement your strategy. And there's a saying, I forget which consultant it was, but it says, culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture eats strategy for lunch. And so the clinical work, understanding human psychology, understanding people, knowing how to work with people, how to deal with conflict, things that trap people, cause people to get stuck in the mud, knowing that has informed all of the business strategies and all the business work we do. So when we consult, we're helping develop the human system to be able to execute against strategy. We're helping build high-performance teams. We're building organizations where people can effectively work with each other and where they can be more innovative and creative. And that's really where the clinical work has really informed the business work.
Can people really, truly work together cooperatively and come up with a solution together as a team? Is that even possible in today's world?
Oh, yeah. In fact, what I found is when we go into organizations and we work with them, we facilitate a learning experience where people actually hear each other, listen to each other, engage with each other. And once they start feeling some success and they understand how to move down that positive track rather than that negative track that I was talking about earlier, it's amazing because everybody would rather make it better than worse. Everybody would rather win. And when they realize we can only win together, then everything shifts, everything changes.
So working together as a team, seeing those vulnerabilities, having the courage to stand up to different people. A lot of it sounds like it's like all touchy-feely and everybody let's hug it out and sing Kumbaya around the fire, but that's really not it, is it?
No, it's not. It's like we call it tough love. It's very often people aren't tough enough. They're too soft. They're unwilling to take the criticism. They're unwilling to give the criticism. However, if you're only tough, then you come across as a Nazi. I mean, people who are just loving come across as patsies. Those that are just too tough come across as Nazis. And both end up failing or getting a fraction of what they could get. So we talk about tough love. If you have a tendency to be more loving and kind and so forth, you've got to bring some toughness in there. That means having the courageous conversations, having the tough conversations, doing it clearly and respectfully. And if you're really good at having those conversations, you're really tough, are you doing it respectfully? Are you doing it in a compassionate way? And so when you bring those two together, this is hard. It's easier to get a PhD in nuclear physics than it is to really figure out the human heart and human mind. And the hardest part about being a leader is dealing with people. And the only job harder than being a good leader is being a good parent.
Like you mentioned, the only thing tougher than being a good leader is to be a good parent. I mean, I think that a lot of us try hard to make it, but sometimes just don't know the rules or don't know what we should do in order to make, either parenting or leadership or, fill in the blank, how to make a go of doing that.
Yeah, there's no rule book on this. And what we say is being a good leader at home, at work, is more of an art form than a science. There is some science to it, understanding that intrinsic drivers will trump extrinsic drivers. In other words, people feeling important inside, feeling fed, feeling nurtured inside will trump the carrot and stick approach. And that if you understand that, you can be much, much more effective. Yet the challenge always is how, in this moment, with this situation, with this child, with this worker, with this employee, with this situation, this client, this customer, how do I get best respond? And that's where you need to keep an open heart. That's where the courage to be vulnerable. Are you vulnerable in the moment? One CEO I know approach was dealing with McDonald's Corporation, the world's largest restaurant chain, and they were going in to pitch a new product. They'd been doing some work with McDonald's, but they were looking for a bigger chunk. And they were confronted by the team there that basically said, hey, your product here that you just tried to introduce, it didn't meet our standards. And her team began arguing with them. And in the middle of that argument, she said, just a minute, gentlemen, to the McDonald's team, you're absolutely right. Our product failed, and I want to apologize. And her own team looked at her, and the mouths dropped open. The McDonald's team looked at her like, okay, she's just admitted that she's not good enough. And then she said, I will promise you, personally, as a CEO of this business, you will have my undivided attention to make sure the next product exceeds your expectations and will always exceed your expectations, and you will have no better partner than us. And we want to learn from every bit of criticism you have. And they got the business. So the courage to be vulnerable, be open, to quit pushing, to be open to criticism, to ask for it, can transform a business relationship as well as a personal relationship.
That's that right there, Dusty. That's a great story. So I can see how this would work with business. How about for somebody that's just starting off, that that's an entrepreneur that's got their idea, they pitch it to their friends. Their friends all said, "Hey, Dusty, that's a great job. That's a fantastic idea. I don't want to be a customer right now, but hey, it's that's a really darn good idea there, buddy." How does the entrepreneur use some of the tactics in the book to move forward with their idea and move forward with being successful?
Well, this goes to the courage to be confronted. Entrepreneurs have the courage to dream and express the dream, and usually they have the courage to act on the dream. The biggest challenge for an entrepreneur is the courage to be confronted around their idea, to invite criticism, to hear it, to learn from it. And then the second big thing is the courage to be vulnerable, to be open to it, and to really take it in. And that means having the courage to learn and grow, to step into the unknown, to give up the need to be right, to quit fighting to be right and focus on the bigger win. So what I say to entrepreneurs or startups, we've done a lot of work with them, probably about 50 of them over the years, is you want to go out and ask, hey, this is an idea. It's what we believe the benefit will be. Tell me everything you see wrong with this idea. Tell me every reason why this won't work. Tell me and so you ask for the criticism. You ask for the most critical thinking you can get. And then you take that into account. And if you take that into account, you begin to see ways in which your ideas might be implemented differently. You begin to see the weaknesses and to address it. We'll often work with a senior leadership team. We'll take half of the CEO, and we'll split the team in half, and half the team will tell, we want you to use our creativity tools, because we have something we call bottom line innovation. We want to use our creativity tools here to talk about how you're going to double the size of the business in 3 years. And then to the other half, we say, all right, this team over here in another room, we want you to come up with, as a competitor, how would you kill this business within 3 years? And they brainstorm and they come up with all their ideas using our tools. Then we have them present to each other. And very often, the very thing that would kill the business is what's going to grow the business. And what is going to grow the business could kill the business if they don't think about it. And then that leads to really a vigorous debate, which leads to then a strategy for growth that takes into account the critical areas that would kill them as well as the critical areas that will move them forward.
I love that. I would have never even thought about putting two teams together and have them come up with one positive, one negative, and then that a lot of them would basically cross over and cancel each other out. That's fantastic. I do also like that you said quit fighting to be right, because I think that oftentimes too many of us, myself included, well, this is a great idea. What do you mean it's a dumb idea?
I'm brilliant.
I think that all too many of the times, Dusty, that we all have that deep within us that it's good to hear it out loud. Don't fight to be right.
You can either be right or happy, not both. Take your pick. And there's a saying we have down here at the South, which is, if Mommy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. The corollary is, if Poppy ain't happy, it's his own damn fault. He should have focused on making Mama happy. And I've noticed that every time I'm right and I really win an argument with my wife, I really lost. And if I argue with a client and I win the argument, I've lost. And so it's a matter not about being right. It's a matter about finding the best answer. It's about making the relationship right. And that requires the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to be confronted, the courage to confront, and the courage to learn and grow.
Dusty, explain to me a failure that you may have had that has turned to a positive thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was when I was working as a consultant for another firm, the CEO called me with concern over something that I had done in the organization the day before. I immediately explained to him why what I did was right, justified it, and we finished the phone call. I went in very proudly to my boss, the same boss I was talking about earlier, who in his 70s, and told him what I had done and how I'd handled it and how I had really been very assertive with that CEO. And he looked at me and said, "You are a damn fool. You've just destroyed your relationship." And he proceeded to chew me out and tell me why. I went back, got on the phone, called the CEO back, and I apologized. I said, I'll call him Bill. I said, "Bill, I want to apologize. I think you were trying to tell me something, and I think I was being too stupid to hear. Would you please tell me again your concerns?" He proceeded to tell me. I listened. I asked lots of clarifying questions. At the end, we come up with what I would do different and what I was going to change. He felt really heard. I apologized, and he said, "I'm glad you called me back, because I just called in the VP of HR to say we weren't going to do business with you guys anymore." He said, "This turns it around. I just want to see you follow through." That was one of my immediate failures and immediate turnarounds, thanks to the great criticism of my hypercritical boss.
So you listened.
I listened, yeah. Hey, there's a rule. Why do you have two ears and one mouth?
Because you need to listen twice as much as you speak. I actually have a quote that I've been saying for many years as a talk radio host, is that my job as a talk radio host isn't to talk. My job is to ask the questions and listen to the answers.
Yeah, well, that's a great interview. Barbara Walters paid millions of dollars a year because she was such a great listener. Most people are terrible listeners. Most people do not listen well. And, Bob, folks like you that make a career out of it, that are really successful, are really good listeners, and they learn to ask powerful questions, follow-up questions, and when they reflect on what's been said and then ask deeper questions, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment and the compliment there. What's Dusty, what's the best thing that you've ever bought?
The best thing I ever bought?
Yeah.
Whoa, gosh, I've never been asked that question. Probably the best thing I ever bought was I was in the airport in D.C., and there was this jewelry store, and there was this beautiful green pendant with silver, kind of in an arrow shape. And it was so beautiful. It was a little expensive. This was back when I was just starting my business. And my wife and I were just starting our marriage. The money was a little tight, but I just saw it around her neck. And I went back 2 or 3 times, but before my flight, I went back in and bought it. And then I gave it to her as just an ad hoc gift, just as an act of love and appreciation. She wears it all the time. It's the most elegant piece of jewelry she has. And it always is kind of a reminder that we had the courage to take the risks and the courage to really share our love with each other. And it's come back to me in so many ways over the years. That's been the best purchase.
Oh, I want to follow up on that then and ask, how does giving something to somebody help you in the long run?
Oh, gosh. When you gift, I like to use the word gift. When you gift somebody with your attention, when you gift somebody with your listening, when you gift somebody with your unreserved praise or appreciation, when you gift somebody with your critical corrective feedback to help them be better, when you gift people with this, they feel grateful. They want to give it back. And it comes back to you tenfold when you gift people, when it's truly a gift as opposed to a manipulation. And I'm going to give you this so I can get that. If I'd given that gift to my wife with the idea that somehow that would make our sexual relationship better, it would not have worked. I gave it to her because it was so beautiful, like her and the spirit in her, and I wanted to honor that, and she felt that. So when you gift people, it comes back to you tenfold, as long as it's not a manipulation. And there's a corollary to this, Bob, which is strong people, and my wife's very strong. I am. I imagine you are too. Very strong people. We work with a lot of strong people in our business. Have trouble receiving. They have trouble being vulnerable. They have trouble saying, I need help, or thank you, or raising their hand and asking for help. And when a strong person shows the gift of receptivity to receive a gift from somebody else, the giver feels stronger, and they want to be able to give more. So it goes both ways. There is the gifting others, and there is the gift of receiving gifts from others that really feeds relationships. And that requires the courage to be vulnerable and the courage to be open.
Robert Dusty Staub is my guest. The 7 Acts of Courage is the name of the book. Dusty, what would you like people to take away from this conversation, and then what would you like them to take away from the book if they get the opportunity to read it?
What I'd like people to take away is that where your courage stops is where your effectiveness stops. Where your courage stops is where your leadership stops, and where your courage stops is where you stop. And courage comes from the tone and quality of our heart. It comes from realizing what really matters, from really knowing who we are and what matters most. And the 7 acts are a way of breaking it down into distinct areas where I'm strong, because we're strong in some, and where I'm not strong, because where I'm not strong is where I'm going to stumble. And if people really take that to heart with the importance that this is one special, unique life, how do you want to live it? I think they'll get a lot of value. And something that supports that is we've got 2 websites. One is just called theactsofcourage.com, The Acts of Courage, where there's videos and there's free talks and there's all kinds of articles and interviews with people. And then staubleadership.com, which is our business-to-business website, is for organizations or leaders who want to see videos and articles or see the services that we offer.
Very good. Last thoughts that you have?
Well, the last thought I would say is this. I believe that everybody is a being of incredible power and light, and most of us are hiding under blankets or bushels. We've bought the lie in our culture that we're not strong. And when you realize the light, the power, the strength you have, and you have the courage to begin to assert yourself in the world, and the courage to look for people to help you, to gift and be gifted, your life becomes one of amazing power and grace.
The BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer. Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com.
This has been another podcastforhire.com production.